let's just see what we can do here. I'm not going to worry about this too much. Like, actually, bring the microphone over. That might help a little bit. We are going to try and play around with the Teachable API and Google Sheets. Everybody should have access to Google Sheets rather than using something like Excel, because Excel is expensive and not everybody has that, but everyone can have access to Google Sheets. Therefore, over here we have Google Sheets. I'm going to click Start New Spreadsheet. I'm going to give it a little title here of Teachable API Test, and we can always change that later. And we're going to leave this for now. We're going to jump back over to Teachable because we need to get an API key from Teachable. Now, in Teachable, you need to have Professional Plan or above. Not Pro Plus, because Pro Plus is not needed. So Professional Plan or above in order to get access to the API keys. Now, I'm going to just double check that. Teachable.com pricing. Let's just double check it. Have a look at the features of what is actually included in it. So public API. So you can actually get it from this one here, which is Pro and above. So yeah, you can't have a basic plan to do this. We don't need that any longer. But over here under the dashboard that we've talked about in the previous video briefly, we do have the option to go to settings, and we have the option to jump over to API keys. And again, you need a professional plan or above in order to do this. Therefore, it'll probably say you need to upgrade your plan if you're on a basic plan. I don't know that it's worth upgrading to the professional plan just to play around with this, but you know, you could if you wanted to. So we're going to create a new API key. I'm not going to use the one that I currently have there, although it is a test. I'm going to just click on Create API Key. We're going to give it a test, a name rather, of Google Sheets. That's fine. We can always create another one later on. And this is the API key here, and we're going to copy the text. Now I'm going to revoke this API key later on, so you won't be able to get access to my school information. That's currently what it is, but it's going to change as soon as I finish recording this video, just in case anyone gets any ideas. So copy text, and we're going to close that. So now we have that copied to the clipboard. We need to do something with it. So over here in Google Sheets, I'm just going to stick it in there for now because we need to actually write some code, and we need to actually, well, do stuff with the Google side of things, right? So the Google Sheet side of things. So for now, let's just let me have a look at my notes. We probably want to maybe add a new sheet just out of curiosity. We'll just bring that back over here. We'll call this sheet here just settings. For now, we may end up changing that later on, and we'll just call this main. Again, it doesn't really matter what you call it. It's just a case of me trying to get things organized so I can present things better. Okay. So we've got the API key here. This is actually in A1, and we may reference that in the actual Google Sheets. Sorry, in the code. But more than likely, I'll take this and put it into a more secure area later on. Maybe not in this video because I don't think we need to. Oops, I just pressed F by mistake. Just in case anyone doesn't know what I did there, I pressed F by mistake, but I didn't press enter. Therefore, I can just press escape and it'll revert what I just did. Also, if I press F and actually hit enter, I can also do Control Z or Command Z if you're on a Mac, Control Z if you're on a PC. So that's just that's pretty much universal, that you can do Control Z or Command Z to go back to the previous setting that you were in. Okay, so we've got this here, we've got this over here. So really, we don't need Teachable any longer. As far as I can tell at the moment, I don't think we do. So back over in Google Sheets, we need to get to AppScripts. AppScripts is the JavaScript-ish, mostly JavaScript type language that Google Sheets uses. So if you click on extensions and AppScripts, you will then open up a new tab that'll give you access to AppScripts. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? We don't need this information here. This is like the starter function, and of course, you could literally write in here and start doing your code inside the starter function, but the code that I have already prepared, rather than writing it all from scratch to start with, because that would be, but I'm going to explain everything. Let me just copy this from my blog post, and I'm going to link the blog post down in the description so that you can get this code without having to type it all out yourself. So we've got this code here, which it does ask for the API key. It does reference here in sheet, the sheet that is currently active. We may have to make sure that we're not on this, the other tab, simply because it'll pull in data here rather than in the main tab. But for now, what we do need to do is we do need to take the API key from over here. So we can actually just copy it rather than cutting it, and we'll just paste that API key over here into the inverted commas, in between the inverted commas, so that we're defining the API key as this variable, which is actually a constant, which is why this says constant. It's constant. So the base URL in order to get the users, which is what we're actually looking for. And where did I get this information from? So Teachable actually has documentation, which is under docs.teachable.com, and it provides the webhook data, some use cases, and just some tutorials, API user guide, and API reference. So if I click on API reference and then have a look at users, and then we want to get the users, because post is when you're sending data to Teachable, patch is when you're sending data to update Teachable, and get is when you're getting information from Teachable. So if we click on users with the user ID at the end of it rather than the users, so which one are we doing? We're doing users. So we're actually doing the users one, not the specific user ID. So the difference between this one and this one is that this one is going to get all users, whereas this one is going to get information about a single user. So this is the endpoint that we're looking at, which is what we have here. That is the endpoint, and the information says to get a list of users from your school. And in order to use this here, you do actually need the API key from Teachable. So we can actually paste our API key in here, and we can look at pretty much any one of these. But if you're coding in Ruby, for example, or in PHP, you can get an example of how to do the actual code. We can just use shell because all we're actually doing is fetching the data to see what it actually looks like. So if we click on shell and then click on try it, what's going to do is going to send off the information to Teachable, and it's going to pull in the data down here. Now I'm going to redact a lot of this information so you can't see it. I don't want people's email addresses and IDs and whatnot being able to be seen. So if we jump back over to the Google Sheets, while we're here, we could rename this and call it Teachable API test. Again, it doesn't matter what you call it. It's up to you what you want to call it. Unsaved changes. I don't know why we've got unsaved changes. We can click on this little symbol here to save the project. They should save it to your Google Drive. And we are probably good to go. I'll probably go down and explain a little bit more of this in a moment. But let's just see if this runs. So let's jump back over to main. I should really probably title these columns. So this would be student ID, this would be student name, and this will be email. What I'm going to do, again, I'm going to redact the email and the student name, and I'm just going to leave the student ID, but just assume that we can actually see people's names because this is live, semi-live data, although people don't really use my school for buying stuff. I have sold products in the past, courses and whatnot, and therefore the information and emails are actually live and valid. So if we click on run and wait a second, you'll notice that this will probably happen to you the first time you run an application through AppScript. So it says authorization is required. This app might not work as expected without providing all requested permissions. Review permissions. We're going to do that. We're going to say me, that's me. We're going to say you choose account. This app is requesting access to sensitive data on your Google account. Goodness me, I'm tongue twisted today. Click on advanced and then go to Teachable API test unsafe. Just make sure this is your account on Google and you'll be okay. We've written the code. I'm showing you how the code works. It's okay to use it. If you don't want to use it, you might as well just stop the video now and go somewhere else. but we want to make sure that we select all because we want to be able to see that the Google account and Teachable can access each other. Well, actually not the Google and Teachable specifically, but Google Sheets and the script that we have here. Make sure that your trust Teachable API test, which is what we've called it up here, Teachable API test. It's our script, so we're happy to do this. And we click continue. And once that's done, it's actually started to run automatically. We can now see that we're pulling in the data from the Teachable API. Now, depending on how many students you have in your school, this could take a good while. Minutes, of course. And this is something I've run into in the past with the Teachable API, is that you have a limit to the number of calls you can make within a certain minute, and you have an overall limit of timeouts, etc. But you can see that we're actually getting the data. It's still pulling it in from the bottom there, and it's given us everything that we need. I think it's done now. We can double check by going back over to AppScript, and we can see that the execution is actually complete. So there we go. From a 37 lines of code, we can actually pull in all of our data as far as users are concerned from Teachable into a Google Sheet. And there's so much more that we can actually do. So should we get into the details of what this is actually doing? So let me, first of all, just make a note that I got an email, a security alert from Google saying that Teachable API test was granted access to your Google account. Just so you know, you're going to get that same type of email. And in fact, I got two notifications. One that came through Gmail and one that came through the Google app on my phone. And essentially saying the same thing. Teachable API test now has access to your Google account. If you did not grant this access, review your account's activity. I'm actually going to say that was me. Yes, it was me, just to double check. And we're good to go there. So you probably will get the same kind of email to your account, and you can approve it if you think you need to. So let me jump over to the definition, or how this Teachable API test AppScript actually works. And we're going to zoom in so you can actually see what we're doing here. The run is associated with the function here. And in fact, if you hover over it, it says select function to run. So if we had more than one function, and a function is basically what's inside these curly brackets here. So all this here is the function, which is called log teachable enrollments. And enrollment, that technically is not the right terminology. We should probably try and make this as, I guess it is the enrollments, because people have enrolled in your school and they've got, this is what we're printing up, enrollments in your school. It could be signups, log teachable signups, and it's okay. If you want to change that to something like signups, it's fine. It's not going to change anything, because now what's going to happen here is that if we click on run, it's going to do the same thing, but it was deleted. So it's actually saying it can't find it because we changed the name of it, right? But as the error was detected, it's actually updated the function that we see here to log teachable signups. So if we run it now, it will start running. And in fact, if we jump over to the sheet, we'll notice that it's actually going to duplicate all of our information that's coming in here, which may be what you want, but it's probably not what you want. So that's something that we could look at as an improvement, perhaps. We can also stop the execution now, but just by clicking the stop. And it actually stops the execution of the function. And what we can do before we go into explaining more about this function here is we can jump back over to the Google Sheet, and we can just select all of the data from the top right down to the very bottom. In fact, there's probably a quicker way to do this. And we can just click on delete rows. There we go. So now we've got nothing there, but if we run the function again, it'll start pulling in our data one more time. So back over here, we've now got a function called log teachable signups, and this is the function that we're going to call when we click on the run button up here. The first const, which is short for constant, which is a variable called sheet, is the get active sheet from our Google Sheet that we have over here. If we were to stop this real quickly and come back over here and then just add another sheet called test. And then we'll leave this as the active sheet and come back over here and click on run. You'll notice that it will start pulling in the data into here rather than our main sheet, because this is the sheet that's currently active, okay? And that's good in some aspects, but it's also bad in other aspects. Most of the time you want to specify what sheet you want to download the data to, particularly if it's important and you forget that you're on the you're on the settings sheet and it's going to start pulling in the data to the wrong sheet, okay? So we want to make sure that that's something that we can work on perhaps in the future. So our next constant is the API key, which we've talked about already. That gives us the access to make the calls to Teachable. And this, along with the base URL, which is the Teachable API endpoint, which you can see here as my comment, this works together as part of the option here to actually go off and fetch the data from Teachable. Because Teachable has pagination, and pagination means that there's more data available rather than what you can just see right now. In fact, if we jump over to the API reference and scroll down to the bottom, the very bottom, we've got the meta, we've got page number 1, we have 118 records, but because we've got 20 records per page, we need 6 pages. So this is only showing us the first page of data, and we've got another 5 pages that we need to get information from. And that's what this page here does, and what the page plus plus over here does as well. We move to the next page to get additional data until we're out of pages, essentially. All right, so per page is 50 here compared to what we're doing over here in the actual default API. We're actually getting 20 per page, and that's simple to change. We could just do 50 here, and we can make a call over here in order to get the same information, but we're going to be getting it at 50 at a time. There we go. And because of that, because we're getting 50 at a time, there's only 3 pages that we need to get the information from. More pages is quite an important variable. In this case, it is a variable, and we're defining it with let, and it's set to true by default. During the while loop, which is a loop that will continue while more pages is true, in this case, then we're going to run through all this information. But once we get to this situation where we've run out of pages, more pages is set to false, and then the whole while loop will stop, and we'll get to the end of the program. Inside the while loop, we've got the URL, which again is the definition of the base URL, and the page, and the number of records per page based on what we're using over here. And it is giving us a URL. In fact, we can actually have a look at that URL. Logger, we need to use capital log. And let's see if we can do something like this. URL equals, and then we'll just put this in here and we'll say URL. So now, and then end it with a semicolon. When we run this, not only will it update the page here, in fact, we can just delete this. We can leave that on the test so that we're pulling the data into the test page. And if we come back over here and run the code, you'll see down in the execution log area, every time it gets a new page, it will output the URL that we've asked for in the logger.log file. And there should be 3 of these, because we need to get 3 times 50 to make sure that we get the 128 records within the pagination that we need. And that should be finished. So we've got 4 pages. So I just noticed a bug, and that's actually quite good that we put in this logger line, because we can now see the URL that we're printing off here. developerteachable.com, blah, 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 users, page 3. Per page is 50. But it's actually given us more than what we'd expect if we have 118 records. Is it 118 records? it is 118 records. So because we're getting 118 records, there should only be 50, 100, 150. There should only be 3 pages. Yeah. But we're getting 7 pages here. So what's the problem? Back over here under the users, if we actually look at the call that we need to make to the request, and this curl request is just, it's a console command that you can use to do the same thing that we're doing with Google Apps script. So over here, we'll see that the URL is users and then per equals 50, not per underscore page. So PER, which is the definition here, is what we need to use in the script. So instead of it being per page, we need to say per. And now, again, we will just go over here and delete all of that records. And then we'll come back over to our code and we will run. And hopefully this time we will only see 3 pages being called. Per equals 50. It's taking a lot longer than the last time. Let's just make sure that we're pulling in the data. It's actually also a little bit faster, pulling it in. And there's ways that we can speed this up by batch pasting it essentially. Right now we're pasting it 1 record at a time, but we're getting 50 records. So we're collecting 50 records and then we're looping over 50 records in the Google Sheet side and we're pasting in 1 record at a time. Whereas essentially what we should do is take the 50 records and paste all the records in at the same time as one paste essentially. But that's something, again, as an upgrade. So there we go. We've actually got 50, 100, 150, 200. Why do we have 4 pages? I don't actually know why we have 4 pages. The logic is correct. It's just my understanding was a little bit faded here. So what's happening is we're looping through, and in the 3rd loop, we're actually still getting records. So we're still pulling in records on the 3rd loop. So it's not until the 4th loop of while more pages that when we get through here and we get the response back, the data comes through and it's an empty array. Therefore, the more pages get set to false on that 4th loop. And then it exits the program. The options method is set to get since data has been retrieved from Teachable. And the headers that we pass in here require the accept application JSON. And then we're also passing through in the headers the API key. And this is what's required from the Teachable side. And the reason I know that is because over here under the documentation, API user guide, requests, we can scroll down the bottom here and we can see the example of what we actually need to send here. So we need the header that says application JSON and we need the API key as the API key. So all the information that I'm using here, I'm actually getting from the Teachable documentation. It's not like secrets that I'm just been able to pick out of thin air. And then we're actually doing the fetch from the API based on the definitions that we create here as far as the URL and the headers that we need to send through. So we're using the fetch, which goes off and actually fetches the data from the API. And initially we're getting the response as text, as a text string, and then we're parsing the response that we get here, response here, and we're parsing it as a JSON, which gives us a JavaScript object that we can then process further. So inside the if statement, we're doing a check to see whether there's still data available. If there's no data, then we are setting more pages to false. So if there is data, what we're doing is we're taking each of the users that we're finding, we're looping through them in this for each, and we're appending the data to the Google Sheet 1 row at a time. This page plus plus is essentially, as it says here, moving to the next page if there's more data still available. Once we've done this loop here and we've got no more records and it's set to false, we print off all records have been fetched and logged. And that's it, essentially. That's all this does. It pulls in all of the data from your Teachable school, prints off the student ID, the student's full name, and the student's email address. What you could do here, and this is what we might do real quickly because it happens to be a question I actually get quite a lot, is how about we take the first name and last name and split it into two different fields. So we can do that over here in the Teachable API. When we get the data from the user name, we're going to have to do something about it before we actually split it. So in this case, we can just use the split function, which is built into the string function. A const first name equals user.name, and I think we need to do split, and we're going to split it on a space, and then we're going to say that this is the first parameter of that split. There's other ways to do this, but I think for me, for explaining this for people, I think this is the easiest way to do it. Last name equals user.name split. This might not even work, to be honest. And we want the second, which is because arrays are zero based, we need the zero. It starts at zero. So 0, 1, 2. 0 is the first, 1 is the second. If there's a third one, it would be 3. And in fact, what happens here is we have to be careful, because if there's a double barrel name, John Smith White, and there's spaces between them all, we're going to just get John and Smith, and we're not going to get the last name. So we're probably going to have to do the last name as something else. And this is one of the problems that we always run into when we're trying to split names that are already set up as a first or as a full name. So what we need to do now is we need to say, instead of saying user.name, we're going to say first name, comma, last name, and we're going to use that instead. And let's just give this a save. Let's have a quick look over here under the test. We'll delete. Well, actually, I don't know, maybe I never explained this, but you can actually select the whole sheet by just clicking on this square here, and then you can just hit delete, and that will delete everything. And then we're going to go back over here and we're going to run, and we may end up getting some errors, but it doesn't look like it. But there we go. We can actually see that it's actually doing the split for us. Let's see if it finds any problems. I think it probably will at some point. Although I did find okay Miles Crocker there because that's got a dash. But Jenny doesn't have a last name. Leo doesn't have a last name. David doesn't have a last name. And that's because their full name was set up as just David. Okay. Terry L, we've got her, that's split up there. I don't know whether there is any triple barrel names. Okay, so another way to do this, as we notice here, we've got everything is working essentially. However, if we've got triple barrel names like John Smith White as an example, and I don't know whether we actually have anybody like that. Let me just delete these two for now and go back over to the way it was before with our, this should be, what is it? It's name, user.name, isn't it? So we've got user.name, and then we're going to come back over here and delete our data again. And then back over here, we're going to run that. And we're going to have a little look and see what we get here. If we get anybody's name that, yes, there we go. So let's just stop this already. We've got a gentleman called Victor Eugenio, and then his last name here. And we want to make sure that we get Victor in the first column and the rest of his name in the second column. So in order to do that, we just have to do it a little bit differently. We're going to split the full name into an array of words, which is something like this: const name parts equals username, user.name split. And this is what we did essentially in the first case. The only difference is we're not going to assign the 0 to this by giving it the first part of the split. We're going to have the whole part is going to be created and saved into name parts. Then we're going to remove the first element and store it as the first name. So const and first name is going to be equal to name parts, which is what we defined just above it. Parts, and shift will remove the first element from an array and return it, which is exactly what we need to do here. We just need to say shift without anything else inside that parenthesis. And then we need to define the last parts of their name, which is the remainder, which we're going to call, again, last name. And we're going to say name parts, which is what's left over, join, and we're going to join it again with another space. We could obviously, if we wanted to make it a double barrel last name and have a dash between it, we could say instead of being Smith White, it could be Smith dash White, and we could define that ourselves if we wanted to by putting a dash there. But in this case, we're just going to leave it as it is. And then now we need to just say, instead of username again, we need to say first name, comma, last name. And then we'll just use that. We're going to save that. We're going to just check to see whether we've got, in fact, what we're going to do is we're actually going to just have it start at the bottom there, but we can delete all these guys, delete rows, and then we will just bring that back in like that. So now when we start the program again, it's going to start it from right here. So we can probably try and see if we can color the background here so we know where we're going to start. And then we're going to come back over here and we're going to run. And jump back over there. We can see that that's where it started. We've got, there we are. So if we stop it again, we can now see that Victor is in the first column and all three words of his last name are in the second column. And there's lots of things that we could do here. We could fetch different data. We can create our own Google Sheets with enrollments and which courses they're enrolled in and what their tag names are and sort them by the tag. And there's a lot of things that we can jump into here. And if you're really interested in how this all works and maybe want to look at some other examples, yeah, let me know. Pop them in the comments and we can decide where we want to go next.